Seth Leibson, Chris Buskirk. It's principles and politics. The Seth and Chris Show is on now.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Second hour still rolling forward. And as promised, we are joined by Brandon Weichert, the editor, publisher, and expert of the Weichert Report. Brandon, you are known as a national security expert. You worked on Capitol Hill. This really is your area. So, which is why we called on you. You've written something that I thought was really interesting on the resignation and the imbroglio leading up to the resignation of General Mike Flynn for American Greatness. I recommend people go over there to read it, and it's provocatively titled. It's called "Can Trump Survive the Fall of Mike Flynn?" Explain your thesis.
Well, basically, first of all, thank you for having me on, Chris. It's a pleasure to speak to you in person, and I know we communicate a lot over email and Facebook, but it's finally nice to be here. But basically, my entire thesis was predicated on the fact that it would seem the press has been trying to get the scalp of any one of Trump's inner circle. And if you look at kind of the vilification of Steve Bannon, you look at Steve Miller, you look at some of these, Kellyanne Conway, these very effective people that are ardent Trump supporters, and they are, and Mike Flynn was among those ardent people, and the media has basically gotten its pound of flesh. And my concern is that this is going to be the first of now many attempts by the media, because now they've kind of got wind in their sails. And the Trump administration until this point was very, very effective, I think, at rebuffing a lot of the hostile media. But now this kind of self-immolation, in a way, of the Trump administration in terms of giving Mike Flynn over to the press, I think the danger is that it's going to open up a new can of worms that they're not going to be able to close again. And so that's my concern.
Right, that's the concern, of course, right? Once there's blood in the water, I mean, this is always the analogy people use, which is you throw blood in the water, you throw blood in the water and the sharks go crazy. They want more and more and more and more. And once obviously we have a very hostile press that wants nothing more than not just to take a scalp or two. They want to take down a president, and they are fully enabled by much of the legacy conservative media as well as the left-wing media. So Donald Trump, just like during the campaign, he has a formidable array of foes against him. The one thing that he has going for him is that he was elected by a very vibrant group of the American people. You know, he got more votes than any Republican president ever in history. I mean, this is a popular president.
No doubt. And that is, and you know, I think I'm not the first to say this. I think actually Rush Limbaugh is the one who always says this. You know, as long as Trump stays true to those who voted for him, because they're the only ones who are in his corner, as long as he stays true to them, there's no doubt that he's going to continue to be a force to be reckoned with. But my concern is that this is going to be a death by 1,000 cuts. And so my hope is that the Trump team is able to stop any more of these kind of events from happening. And it's not even that I think that I know Mike Flynn a little bit. I've had dinner with him. My wife and I at an event in D.C. a year and a half ago, and he was very smart, very serious, somebody that I felt very proud to dedicated his life to our country. But I didn't know if he was the best choice for a national security advisor, but I understood why Trump picked him, because, again, he was an ardent supporter of Trump, and Trump could trust him, and they had a good rapport. And as I noted in my article at American Greatness, he's somebody that came up like Trump and who's a fighter. And so even though I didn't think he was necessarily the best choice, he's our guy. He's Trump's guy, therefore he's our guy in the kind of the Trump movement. And it worried me to see kind of this abandonment of Flynn. And as you noted in the previous hour, I heard a little bit. You're right. Harward actually could be a step up, and he certainly, because of his experience previously on the Bush National Security Council as a military liaison, I think he would certainly rebuff a lot of the circular firing squad that is the GOP establishment right now. He would placate some of their concerns, I think. But my concern was the way that this was implemented, and also the way that Sean Spicer framed it in the press conference, in which he said it was an erosion of trust. I don't know if that was exactly the best thing to say. I don't know why they couldn't have just said that he felt it was necessary to accept his resignation. I don't know why we had to, the Trump team had to kind of do it the way they did. That concerned me.
Brandon, my take is that there are definitely factions within the White House. I mean, as there are in any White House, but there are really distinct factions in this White House, and you have the I would call them the Trump team, the people like Bannon, like Steve Miller, like not that he's in the White House, but Jeff Sessions. I mean, you have the people who believe in Trump's mission and in his agenda. And I think I would put Flynn on that. I mean, again, I'm well aware of some of the misgivings maybe we had about Flynn. Not that we were opposed to him in his original nomination, but said, well, good, but we could maybe get great.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yes. But again,
he was our guy.
Our guy.
Right. And that's right. He was on Team Trump, and politics is a team sport.
That's right.
And that is, I mean, to me, that's all you need to say. You don't leave any man on the field.
That's
period.
Right. That's right.
The other wing is Priebus, Spicer, potentially Pence, right? These are people who are much more wedded to the Republican establishment. They don't really want to shake things up too much. They don't want to change anything. They just want to make sure that they get theirs and move on. Donald Trump is a change agent. He is there to shake things up, and basically, to use an analogy, I mean, this is the United States is a car going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. He's trying to execute a U-turn.
It's Flight 93. You've got to charge the cockpit, as Michael Anton wrote in his brilliant essay.
Right, and this is, again, Mike Anton, a friend, is a good example of the type of very, very high-quality people who Donald Trump has in the West Wing, in Anton's case, on the Security Council. Right. The concern, of course, is where does it stop, right?
That's
and
right.
one way, and you've alluded to it here a bit, I think, Brandon, is one way to stop the bleeding is a Harwood or a Harward.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
I mean, it's the celebrating I think would be very short lived if they find out that they swapped Flynn for Harward.
Yes, yeah, and in fact, what I said in the article was basically that Trump is going to have to, now that he's signaled to his opponents, which I include a majority of the GOP establishment on the Hill, and I can tell you from direct experience, having worked with these guys on the Hill, they are very much anti-Trump. So in fact, some of his biggest enemies are going to be from, like you've seen with McCain, are going to be from fellow Republicans, which is just insane. But that's the way it's going to be. And so now that the Trump team has signaled we're getting rid of this kind of colorful outsider like Flynn, we're now going to bring in someone who's a little bit more respected, not just by fellow outsiders, but also by the insiders. I think Harward actually could. I think he could actually really complicate the kind of, as Michael Walsh refers to them as, the bipartisan fusion party. He could really compromise their ability to undermine the Trump presidency. And I think that's going to be the key. Is you want to find somebody who's low key, but also a fellow traveler in the sense that they want to be a change agent and a change for conservative values, not for the usual left wing malarkey, to use Joe Biden's term.
Well, finally we find something we agree with Joe Biden. The malarkey is, I think, the best word we could use for that, at least on the radio.
Absolutely. Yes, I actually had to. My wife warned me before I got on, because I've been since the resignation was announced last night. I've been on a tear. So I dropped a few expletives before I got on the air about something that I was reading.
Just to clear the pipe, so to speak,
yes,
get it out before you got on the air.
I was just so I have been. Again, it's not that Flynn I thought was the best choice, but again, he's our guy, and it pains me to see this kind of bloodbath going on with our guy. And I understand now, finally, I think, when Dick Cheney was so incensed with George W. Bush over Scooter Libby not getting a pardon. It's that they're our guys. It is a team sport. And make no mistake, if the last 3 weeks haven't proven it, I don't know what will. Not just the media, but academia and most of the administrative state, the deep state, are arrayed against us. And so we've got to protect our own.
Brandon, it's so funny you bring up the Cheney Scooter Libby thing, but Seth and I were talking about that exact point this morning, which is to say you cannot let the jackals get at your people because they just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And by the way, everybody else on your team is watching to see how you deal with the wounded. You know, do you shoot them or do you carry them off the battlefield to the hospital? What's that?
That's why we have so many cowards in our party, I think, because they're afraid of
they're afraid of being sacrificed and left behind. Right. Brandon, we're going to go to a break.
Okay.
When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about who you think would be a good replacement for General Flynn. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
Just what I need. Just what I
jump to the left. With your hands on your hips.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show, joined by Brandon Weichert of the Weichert Report. Brandon is a known expert on national security matters and is joining us to talk about the fallout from the resignation from the National Security Council of General Mike Flynn. Brandon, there's a lot going on here, right? I mean, the narrative that we're getting in the press is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, literally the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more going. Well, not literally. It's not really an iceberg, but you know what I mean. The analogy is apt. Point being, there's so much going on below the surface because there's been all of these machinations behind the scenes as to who is going to be on the National Security Council. Will it be staffed with people who support the president, or will it be staffed with people who support the status quo?
That is absolutely correct. That is, in a way, that has been the great battle for the soul of the Republican Party since at least Ronald Reagan. Is the more kind of blue-blooded Northeast Republican establishment types versus everyone else in the conservative movement. Actually, going back to Goldwater, rather. Yes, and that is at play here. And in regards to the NSC, I mentioned this in the article at American Greatness that I wrote. There is a rumor, and I don't know if this was just the Clinton News Network, spewing more lies, but which is what they seem to do anymore these days. There was a rumor going around last night that Admiral James Stavridis, who's the former NATO commander under Obama, might have been on the short list of potential replacements for Flynn. And I, in the article, illustrate why that's a very bad idea. I've met him before at the NATO convention in Chicago in 2012. He is an agent of this kind of bipartisan fusion party. He was actually on the short list for Veep nominees for Hillary Clinton, and so I cannot stress how much of a terrible idea that is if he is in fact on the short list. But this is kind of endemic now. This is kind of a great illustration of what's going on at this great kind of battle for the soul, not just of the GOP now, or the conservative movement, as we've seen, but also with the Trump administration itself. And I don't know who wins because it seems that the forces of the status quo have an entrenched advantage. They have the administrative state. They have Congress. They have the media. They have academia. They have all of what Lenin referred to as the transmission belts for society. And so it's a very precarious position here. I think Trump, though, if he doubles down and continues being Trump and doesn't keep, feeding the press things like he did with Flynn or his administration did with Flynn, I think that he can really overcome a lot of these obstacles.
Yeah, this is something that people don't appreciate, which is that there are forces in Washington that are directly opposed to the will of the people, who are directly opposed to respecting what happened on November 8th on Election Day, because they think they know better. They have a different agenda. And so, yes, Donald Trump won. Yes, Donald Trump campaigned on a specific agenda that was antithetical to what the Washington establishment, the so-called bipartisan fusion party, has wanted to do and continues to want to do. But the battle goes on. He gets into the White House. Well, now there's the battle to staff all of these 3,000 or 4,000 appointed positions. And so you have people like John McCain who are trying to get their people in, and their people are working against Donald Trump's agenda, the one that he campaigned on, the one that he won election on.
Well, they don't respect. So I will never forget. This was actually during the Obama transition. I at this point was in Chicago, and a good friend of mine I grew up with in Florida, got a job at the Pentagon, and this was during the transition for Obama. And he was emailing me back and forth, and he told me that all of the people in the Pentagon were kind of joking around when Obama assumed power and started trying to make changes that he wanted. They were all kind of joking that, yeah, he's just here for 4, maybe 8 years. We're here for the rest of our lives. And even though I was opposed to Obama, I still thought, man, that's kind of dangerous because, continuity, there's an argument to be had that we want to keep a degree of continuity, but there's also an argument that I think is more powerful, which is that the Constitution empowers every 4 years the American people to make a choice of whether they want to continue with the policies that are in place or whether they want to change them. And part of that is staffing the government with people that are loyal to the president or at least share his desire to get the will of the people accomplished as best they can. And to me, there seems to be this almost arrogance. No, it isn't arrogance toward the rest of the country who voted for Donald Trump. It's obscene, frankly, and I just wish that there was some way that I could communicate to these individuals that, really, you may win this battle, but it makes you look really bad, and it only makes things worse for the country. Nobody's benefiting outside of the Beltway.
Well, and since that's where they live, they don't. I think they mostly don't care, right? Well, okay. Well, we're benefiting, so next.
Well, it's funny. I did an interview last week with Patrick Johnson of the Christian Science Monitor, and he was doing an article I had written for American Greatness comparing Trump and FDR and how that was a good thing that Trump was like FDR. And something that I said to him that he included in the piece was that I said, I live in Northern Virginia. I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and every one of my neighbors, for the most part, in Alexandria, Virginia, are dyed-in-the-wool liberals, and yet they're living in these homes that are very expensive, and they're all working for the government. They're all working for lobbyists. They're all working for these law firms. And I said to people in the inner Beltway, especially, but the Beltway in general, they don't understand the quote-unquote dark vision of Trump because to them life is perfect. Why would anybody have a negative view of what Obama was doing in their eyes? And so I don't know how we break.
Right, employment keeps going up, wages keep rising. If you work for the government,
yes, and it's really scary because that you can't. A society does not function, especially a republic, as such as ours, or at least a representative democracy such as ours. That kind of society doesn't last long if the people who are running the show never change, and if their view is they look down on the 99% rest of the country. There's your real 1% is in the government and all of the attendant industries.
Well, you've just made the argument perfectly against the administrative state. I mean, your story about the folks in the Pentagon, and as conservatives, we're more sympathetic to the Pentagon than maybe to some of the other departments. But nonetheless, the point is that when you let people stay, they get a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
Right, and so now they have a sense of entitlement and a knowledge, quite honestly, that they're going to be in power much longer than any president, and so they're going to do what they want.
Yes, and they know best, and then they go to the Hopkins, Johns Hopkins of the world, and they go to Harvard and they teach, and then they instill this sense. And I know because I went through the education system, I'm thankful that I got to go to the Institute of World Politics in Washington D.C., which is a bit more conservative leaning, and it's a bit better at teaching you the fundamentals of American government and its role in national security. But most of my peers in the industry here, they all kind of went to the same 6 schools on the East Coast, and they all kind of have a shared world vision, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats. They have an agenda, and it isn't in our interest necessarily.
Brenda, we didn't get to who would be a good replacement. Do you have time for one more segment?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, very good. Brenda Weichert, we're going to go to a break, then we'll come back with your thoughts on who would be a good replacement, and maybe this can actually turn into an opportunity for Donald Trump to actually advance his agenda, to take, and it would not be beyond him, quite honestly, to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Interested to hear your perspective on that. We'll be right back with more of the Seth and Chris Show.
9.
It was a slow day, and the sun was beating on the soldiers.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Have Brandon Weichert have prevailed upon him to stay for another segment. Thanks for a bunch for that, Brandon. Question for you. Yeah, this is something that you really have to be tuned into these things to have noticed. But last week, a deputy national security, a deputy to National Security Advisor Mike Flynn resigned. Robin Townley. Tell me what you make of that. My understanding of that of that whole incident, his resignation, is that Townley was really a McCain guy. That it was McCain's influence that got him there. That he was opposed to the Trump agenda, and that getting him to resign was in fact a positive and was part of cleaning house at the NSC.
Well, yeah, I actually. It's funny because I've been hearing about. Basically, I have a lot of friends because I previously worked on some very low level when I was in my teens and early 20s. I worked on some political campaigns for the GOP, and so a lot of my friends that I know are trying to get in with the transition team. And what they discovered was that certain people on the transition team were very serious about preventing anyone with Bush or Romney connections from. They were very skeptical of them. And I think that was understandably so. And so I'm actually not as closely familiar with the Townley issue. I know that he was a former Marine intelligence officer, and he couldn't get a top-level security clearance. I think it probably was because of his connections with McCain. Not that I don't know him personally. I don't know, so I don't want to cast aspersions on what exactly was the details there, but I do think it had something to do with his connections.
What people who are in a position to know these things tell me, and definitely not anybody on the National Security Council, but close observers of what's gone on there, is that McCain got one of his guys to run the transition for the NSC, and as a result had a tremendous influence on staffing. And so you have some great people there, but you also basically have some fifth columnists. You have some sleeper cells who are deeply opposed to the Trump agenda, and they have slipped into the National Security Council.
Oh yeah,
and I wonder. You're saying this like this is like you have heard this as well.
Oh yeah. Well, not only that, but Chris, you have to remember. Many, if not, no, I would say many, I don't want to say all, but many of Obama's National Security Council staffers, the researchers, the 20-somethings like me that were the Democrats, that these dyed-in-the-wool leftists, many of them were kept in place by Trump, and I never understood this. The New York Times has an article from January 29th that detailed all of the exact positions that were being maintained by Obama's people at the request of Donald Trump for the sake of, quote, continuity. And I'm sorry, but when I read that, and it's kind of always been in the back of my head, especially with what's going on now, I just start to really kind of get worried because not only do you have the kind of the GOP-y, elements there, but you've also got outright Obama leftists. And in fact, there's an article on the Free Beacon today about detailing how Ben Rhodes, as always, Obama's right-hand guy, the failed writer, Ben Rhodes, and a lot of these former Obama NSC people that are still involved with the NSC working for the Trump team, they coordinated all of these leaks around Flynn. They wanted to take out Flynn because he was such an ardent opponent to the Iran nuclear deal, which is the linchpin of the Obama foreign policy legacy.
I've got the article in front of me, actually. It's called Former Obama Officials and Loyalists Wage Secret Campaign to Oust Flynn. And yes, Ben Rhodes was at the center of it, was basically the architect of it. We talk about the death of journalism, of investigative reporting. Adam Credo, who we actually had on the show last week, is the author of this. He's the guy who actually went and did real shoe leather reporting and dug in on this thing. We're going to have him on the show tomorrow to talk about this because when you read this, it is absolutely astounding. Taking down Mike Flynn was a priority for the Obama people, starting back in November when his name was first surfaced, and it was a part of a definitive plan. And Adam Credo has done great reporting on this.
Yes, he has. I've read him, And one quick thing, Nixon used to rail about the quote-unquote counter-government of Kennedy and Johnson liberals. And I am telling you, I know he sounded paranoid in the Nixon tapes, but I am convinced that that has always been a thing. And furthermore, in 2004, in the run-up to the re-election for Bush, Cheney and his staff were convinced. Peter Baker's book, Days of Fire, talks about this. Cheney and his team were convinced that there was a movement within the CIA, and I think it was John Brennan's group, to basically regime change in America and get Kerry elected through leaks. And I think that the same group is at play right now with Flynn.
Well, of course, look at all the leaks. These things don't just happen. And by the way, they're illegal. Where is the investigation of the leakers? I mean, some of those people need to be investigated, found out, and sent to prison. What do you say, Brandon? In the next segment, should we do who would be a good replacement?
Yeah, I promise. Yes.
All right, let's do it. We'll be right back with more with Brandon Weichert. Seth and Chris show. Got Brandon Weichert sitting in with us. Brandon, we keep teasing it. Why don't we just do it? What? Before we talk about who would be a good replacement for Mike Flynn, why don't we talk about what would be the characteristics that we should be looking at as a replacement, and then maybe we can talk about some names.
Certainly. Well, I mean, it's pretty basic. I think that Mike Flynn had the kind of basic world view. I do think that we need to have someone who's not adversarial with Russia, but who is a bit more skeptical of Russia. We just have a history in this country of, unfortunately, having tense relations with Russia. That's just the nature of the beast. I always liken it to France and Britain, during the colonial era, where they were frenemies. So I do think that we need to have someone with a little bit more of a harsher view on Russia, but it's still going to work when necessary with Russia. But aside from that, I think that Mike Flynn provides a good template, but somebody less controversial in terms of what they say on social media, for instance, and what they do, in the public eye. And someone who probably is not going to become the story, that they're going to always be able to push the agenda without becoming kind of the spotlight of the story. And so that's kind of the base, and who shares, obviously, Trump's kind of necessarily hardline foreign policy views, and who's going to be able to put in the reforms necessary to the national security apparatus.
Right. So explain a little bit what are, in terms of policy positions. Why don't you tick off maybe the top three policy positions that you think are important, and then go into what are the changes that are required in the national security apparatus.
Certainly. Well, the first is the ISIS issue. We have to destroy. I mean, President Trump has been pretty clear. Destroy ISIS. That's the priority. Secretary of Defense Mattis has been very clear as well. Destroy ISIS. That has to be our priority. Then the second thing we're going to need to worry about is dealing with China. China is not our friend. I have an article pending at American Greatness on this very issue. I was very disheartened when I heard that President Trump, and now of course he can reverse this, but when he made the comments reaffirming the one China policy that essentially refuses to recognize Taiwan as an independent state, but instead focuses on recognizing Red China. I have a problem with that. They do not have our best interest at heart. And then third would probably be dealing with the rogues of the rogue states of Iran and North Korea. And those are kind of the top three issues. And if you want to put a fourth in there to button it up, I would say Russia. We have to take a stronger line on Russian revanchism in Europe, eastern Ukraine. And then the other part of your question, reforms. One of the biggest things we have to do is downsize the kind of bureaucracy of the national security state. And then we also have to implement the kind of reforms that will prevent what's known as the interagency process on the National Security Council. That's the process where all of the foreign policy and intelligence and defense departments come together and try to pipe in a good working policy for whatever given foreign issue they're dealing with. We've got to do things to reduce bureaucratic bloat in that area, because that's what slowed us down in Iraq. That's what caused a lot of the confusion in Iraq, and that's what caused kind of the big screw-ups in Iraq. That's just kind of the abbreviated version.
Brandon, it's probably a subject for another day, but we should probably talk about what you think an appropriate Russia policy looks like. You may actually want to take a harder line on that than I do, but I'd like to talk that out at a future date.
I'd love to.
Interested also to talk about what dismantling the Iran nuclear deal looks like. I know that is something, we talk about Ben Rhodes, Obama's guy, who has apparently laid all of these traps for Mike Flynn, successful traps. They got him. But he is somebody who was wedded to the Obama policy of appeasement of Iran and wants to see the Iran deal stay in place. How to dismantle that, I think, is subject to that needs to stand on its own. So I want to put down sort of a placeholder for that for the future. Sure. But with keeping in mind the characteristics that you are talking about as to what we should be looking for in a national security advisor, why don't you name a few prospects that you think are good and a few that you think we should definitely stay away from?
Well, I've already named the one biggie that I really am opposed to is starvritis, and I don't even know if that is inaccurate. That's a rumor, but if it is any truth to that, I would say squelch that now because you don't want that. You don't want anyone who was an overt anti-Trump, never Trumper. I heard recently that Elliot Abrams, the kind of father neocon, was on the short list for the number 2 position at State Department. You don't want anyone like that. I'm glad that Trump crossed his name off at State.
I am too.
Want someone like that.
I just want to make sure I'm on the record on that. I am very happy that the potential nomination got crushed.
Me too. Very much. And so you don't want people like that. What you do want, there's a guy on Fox News that I've been reading for years, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. The problem is he was an open never Trumper. But if we could find someone like that, I know personally Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who is on the NSC right now. I think he would be. I don't think he wants. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him, but I think that he has been a very early Trump supporter. He is brilliant on counterterrorism issues. I think that he is excellent. And if you haven't seen him in the interviews, you should look him up on YouTube. Sebastian Gorka, Gorka. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's brilliant. And in terms of the number one issue being ISIS, he is dead on. We're with where you need to be. So I think he'd be a great pick. I think, but I don't know if he's even on the list for that position. I think that Harward, I can never say his name, and I noticed in the article.
You want to say Harwood, don't you? But it's Harward.
Yeah, and I noticed that my autocorrect when I submitted the article to American Greatness, I think it changed it from Harward to Harwood, but it's Harward. I think that he's going to be, if this is in fact an accurate list, and it's coming from the media, so you never know these days, but if it is an accurate list of those names, I would say that Harward is probably the best choice. He mollifies the GOP establishment. He's still a hardliner, and he has that kind of that personality and that background, that military background that Donald Trump seems to like, and I think he's going to gel well with the other folks in the national security team.
For people who don't know, he's a retired admiral. He's a naval academy graduate and a former Navy SEAL. That's right.
He was I think number 2 over at CENTCOM for a while as well before he left the service. He retired. But I think he's that kind of that silent professional, and I think for Donald Trump, what he really needs is to keep the spotlight on him in terms of media, and keep it away from the policy people, because as I was always trained as a policy person, you always want the policies to be at the front and center. You don't necessarily want the policy makers to be at the front and center, because then that means you're not able to get your job done, and if the person who's advocating for policies has a public failing, as we saw with Mike Flynn, that can tend to seriously debilitate the actual policy making.
No, that's exactly right. You want the quiet professional who's going to be there, who's going to be able to run the national security apparatus quietly but proficiently, and is going to execute the president's policies. There are people who can make the case in public. That's why, for instance, at the National Security Council, that's why they have Mike Anton there as their communications chief. He's very, very good at that. There are other people who do that. Let the senior people execute on the policy. Brandon, thanks very much. This has been a great hour that we've spent together. We're going to have you back. I think that
I would love to. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think our listeners know a whole lot more than they did an hour ago, and for that, I thank you. Brandon Weichert, everybody. We'll have him back early and often. Have a good one, Brandon.
Thank you. You too, Chris. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Just a couple of final comments here in this short segment before we go to the top of the hour break. And there will be news from Corey in that break as well. But just a couple comments just following up on the discussion we just had with Brandon Weichert. He is the head of the Weichert Report. He is also a frequent contributor to American Greatness and is really, really good on these issues. He is a national security professional, knows the subject, as you can tell from the discussion we had with him, very, very well. Using one of the criteria that Brandon had for us and what to look for or what not to look for in a replacement for General Mike Flynn at the National Security Council as the National Security Advisor to the President is somebody who's not going to be the story. Somebody who can execute the president's policies, can do it quietly, can do it professionally, and effectively. And one of the names that's been floated out there is General David Petraeus, former chief in Iraq, also the former director of the CIA. This is somebody who I think, based on that criteria alone, and some others as well, but on that criteria alone, needs to stay far, far away from the National Security Council. This is somebody we will recall that was convicted of exposing national security secrets to his mistress, and as a result was forced to leave government service. And that's the type of personality. It's a big name in Washington. It's somebody everybody's heard his name over the past 10 years, whether it be from his service in Iraq or because of what he did at CIA, both good and bad. That is not the type of thing that the Trump team needs, and and based on that, I really don't think, despite what some of these press reports are, I really don't think that's going to be taken very seriously. On the other hand, this retired Vice Admiral Robert Harwood, he goes by Bob Harwood, a retired SEAL, and somebody who is known as a true professional, but also a hawk, somebody who has America's interests at heart, without having the neocon tendency to want to get involved in every little war around the world that they can. Somebody is Harwood. This is somebody who wants to take American security seriously. That is the sort of person that I think the Trump administration ought to be looking at, and if the reports are accurate, that we see is taking a hard look at, and that is all to the good. The just I guess final thought on that is that the news is coming across the wire right now. K.T. McFarland, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor, was earlier today reported as would be resigning, and the communications director for the National Security Council, Mike Anton, is now saying that no, she is not resigning, that he has not heard anything along that line, and flatly, here's the sentence: KT is staying, period. And that's a good thing. KT McFarland was a good pick. And there's quite honestly no reason that we need any more turmoil at the National Security Council. We need a strong advisor. We need to move on. There's a lot going on in the country, and there's a lot of things that the Trump administration yet needs to do. Promises yet to be kept. I'm Chris. Seth is out today, but we'll be right back with more of the Seth and Chris Show.